That strange and frankly suspicious call that you just heard was made on June the 19th, 2014 by a man named Stephen Port. Port called the ambulance services when he found 23-year-old Anthony Walgate unconscious and propped up against a wall near some flats in East London, or so he says. Little did the police know at the time that the man on the other end of the phone knew a lot more about this situation than he was letting on to the police. And when they arrived at the scene, the police were not met by a man who had passed out, by a man who was drunk or unconscious. This man was actually dead. In today's video, we are going to discuss the life and crimes of Stephen Port, aka the Grindr Killer.
This video contains distressing details on the case of Stephen Port, so we very much advise discretion before watching it. And just remember, Joey and I are two normal blokes discussing cases as if we were down the pub and you guys are just listening in. So remember, we only have access to public available information. But without further ado, let's get into the video.
But just quickly before we get into all that, you are currently right now locked into Joey and Josh. We are dropping weekly videos off of this channel, so make sure if it's your cup of tea, you are subscribed to the channel. We're also offering a membership scheme where you will be able to access every video up to 48 hours before they dropped, as well as being part of a weekly members only live stream. So if that sounds like a bit of you, make sure you sign up as a member. If not, let's get back into it.
So the first point that we need to go to on this case is on the 19th of June 2014, when that anonymous 999 call that you heard at the very start of the video was made. Now, when emergency services arrived at Cook Street, a young man, Anthony Walgate, was found slumped against a wall outside a block of flats, and basically he was pronounced dead shortly before 8 a.m. Now, he had documents on him that were able to identify that that was indeed Anthony Walgate. Several people who attended the scene initially found the death incredibly suspicious. A police constable believed the death was suspicious and noted that there were bruising and blood on the lad's torso. A paramedic at the scene also regarded it as an unexplained serious death and had suspicions because of the way that Anthony's body was actually positioned. Basically, he was sat upright with his legs crossed, which didn't make any sense at all. And at this point, it was found to be really strange, a little thing here, that his underpants were inside out and back to front, and his zip on his trousers was broken, and the trouser zip was open.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of things that just didn't add up.
From looking at the case, I mean, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but it would suggest that someone else had dressed him. Like you say, you know, the fact that he was cross-legged as well, is if he'd had a seizure, his legs would have straightened out in the process of doing that. And there were other things that were treated initially as quite suspicious, weren't there?
Yes, remember, the 999 call comes in, and he's saying that I've just seen this guy, looks, you know, like he's untoward, might be dead, not sure. It's found that this body was completely cold. Anthony had probably been dead for a significant amount of time, potentially over a day, right? And so there were loads of other things as well, like basically paramedics, police, people that saw the body, all of the people thought, yeah, this guy is dead and might have been dead for a long time. But really strangely, mate, there was a crime scene manager that basically deemed this to be not a suspicious death. They deemed it to be completely normal, and basically the police kind of forgot about it from that point on, didn't they?
And would that have been purely because of the toxicology report, because they had found drugs in the system, and it's an easy open and shut case in that moment? If you find drugs in someone's system, you can very easily go, okay, overdose, even though there was so much more sort of circumstantial evidence that would lead you to believe that there could be third-party involvement here.
This is the thing, and look, I think in this episode what we're going to do is often talk about police incompetence and their inability to run cases, but what you have to say is the police often have to deal with drug overdoses. They have to deal with a lot of stuff which in itself can be traumatic, horrible experiences. And also, I'm not giving any sensitivity or sort of any I suppose sort of like credit to the police here, but you have to say they're often dealing with stuff like this. So unfortunately, mate, yeah, they kind of dealt it and put it down to another drug overdose, and something that they just sort of moved on from.
And did they actually look into who the man they found was in Anthony Walgate? Did they look into his background? Because surely by doing so, that would have given some sort of clues as to what happened tonight. My indication would be he didn't go and sit in a block of flats nowhere near where he lived on his own and get high. The indication would be that there was someone else involved and someone he was with.
I'll tell you a bit more about who Anthony Walgate was. He was a 23-year-old fashion student from Hull who'd moved down to London to study. His mother described him as really clever, funny and talented, and he had aspirations to be a famous fashion designer. And his mum also said that he had an amazing ability to be super passionate, super determined, and basically described him as someone that people wanted to be around. He would make people laugh, and people always left seeing him smiling. The bad news, and I suppose the sort of sad part of this is, you know, as a student, this guy was a bit hard up. He didn't make loads of money. You know, he wasn't really well off. So he had to turn to escorting to earn some extra money while he was at university. But the guy was smart, right? He did it sensibly. And basically what he would do is he would always sort of let people know where he was going and let people know who he was going to meet, so that he was always sort of protected, right? But really unfortunately for him, on the night of the 17th of June, 36 hours before his body was discovered, Anthony had arranged to meet someone for what he described as an overnight job using the app Sleepyboy, where he was offered 800 quid for basically a night with another person. He left for Barking Station just after 10:15, and there's some CCTV that actually captures him, and that's the last time that he's seen alive. Now, the man that he actually met with this app was called Stephen Port.
Now, both Anthony and Stephen Port actually had their laptops seized at this time, and it wasn't until a good few months after this that Stephen Port's laptop was actually looked into. At the time, it was confirmed that Anthony was with Stephen Port because of the fact, as Josh says, he was very observant in making sure that he told friends who he was with, who he was meeting, and where he was going, and therefore they knew that he had met Stephen Port that night. But what we do need to do before we speak any more about this situation is give you guys an idea of exactly who Stephen Port is. So Stephen Port was born in Southend-on-Sea in 1975, but he grew up in Dagenham. He was bullied in school, struggled to make friends, and was very much an outcast. He worked a variety of jobs after leaving school, but most notably, he worked in a few different roles as a chef. He even appeared on an episode of Celebrity MasterChef. In his early 30s, he buys a one-bedroom flat in Barking, East London. However, he is still seen as very much emotionally immature by friends, who even recall Stephen attending a party with other adults and spending all night on the floor, sat cross-legged like a child, playing with a children's fire truck toy. A neighbour of Stephen Port's described him as having an insatiable thirst for young men. And once he did move out from his parents' family home and moved into the flat in Barking, Stephen Port was definitely able to take the rails off. He was able to live out a life more in the mould of what his fantasies desired, and that included having drug-fueled parties and a lot of sexual parties in that flat. Stephen wore a wig to hide his bald scalp and was an avid user of gay dating apps, most notably Grindr. It's known that Stephen has an obsession with drugging people, often against their will, and his drug of choice being a drug called GHB, which is a party drug, but it's also a drug that is frequently used amongst the homosexual community.
We haven't really linked the two men in terms of the way the police sort of wanted to look at the case right now, have we? Basically, we know that there was an anonymous call. We don't know who that is, and therefore we found this dead body. How does it all link up, right? So I think the first thing the police tried to do is sort of find out who that was on the phone, and they actually managed to triangulate the call back to Stephen Port's apartment. Did you hear about that?
Yeah. And they also knew at this time that Stephen Port was a man who had had an allegation against him that had been saved on police records, even though the allegation wasn't followed through. It never went to court, anything like that. It was on police records that it had an allegation against him by another man who had claimed that he had both drugged and raped him.
Well, that kind of begs the question then. If they know this about him, the police know all this information, how have they then linked him back?
How are they let him go
Yeah.
is the question.
True.
Really, that you've got to ask yourself. Obviously, we spoke about the laptops being seized at the time. At this moment in time, they had already made the connection to know that Stephen Port was the man that was obviously with the young man who was found deceased on the night. So they didn't go as far in searching the laptop. Now, at this moment in time, because they know that Stephen Port was meeting that man and his memory sort of miraculously comes back to him when they prove this to him, all they can charge him with is perverting the course of justice. However, one look on that laptop, on the search history, would have showed you that he was frequently making internet searches for how to drug partners, what amount of dosage to give them of this GHB that was found in their system. So it's almost a tap-in from a police perspective if they search this laptop to indicate that not only has this man perverted the course of justice, this man has potentially taken this other man's life.
Yeah, and this is one of the key elements here where the police have completely failed, because they have access to the laptop. They've confiscated it. They have complete control over it. They can search anything that they want to. They could do a thorough run through, but the police don't do it, mate. So yeah, first of many failings in this case.
Now, after changing his story a few times, Stephen Port eventually, very reluctantly, admits that he did know Anthony. He had hired Anthony as an escort for the night. However, Anthony had taken drugs off of his own accord and had accidentally overdosed from, self-inflicted methods of taking those drugs at Stephen Port's flat. And didn't Stephen Port say that at the time he just panicked?
He did, yeah. Basically, he said he saw him take these drugs. He then passed away, and he didn't know what to do with the body, shut himself, and so he had to dispose of it somehow, and so he ended up doing what he did. Do you know the saddest thing, by the way, about this case is that he promised this guy to pay him 800 quid. Not only did he take his own life, he would never have paid him anyway. He didn't have any savings, this guy. It just shows you how psychopathic this guy actually is, that he just willingly takes someone's life so easily, then just throw them away right outside his own flat. This guy is a sick individual.
Well, we speak about outside his own flat. This leads us on to a few months later, the 28th of August. A second body is found. This time, it is 22-year-old Gabriel Kovari, who was found propped up against a wall in a graveyard just 2 minutes from Stephen Port's flat. Less than 500 meters from the exact location another dead body had been found just 2 months earlier. But before we talk about Gabriel, we need to give a bit of context of what unfolded after this body was found. Because roughly just 3 weeks later, on September the 20th, a third body is found. This body is that of Daniel Whitworth, a 21-year-old chef. It's not found near the first two bodies. It is found in the exact same location as the second body, propped up against the exact same wall in the exact same graveyard. And in a bizarre coincidence and a baffling twist of fate here for me, the body is found by the same person. Could you imagine being this dog walker who found the body? You go in to the church. You've had a traumatic experience. Let's be completely honest here.
Completely, yeah. This is the thing. Seeing a dead body for the first time and only ever seeing one dead body is incredibly traumatic, especially when you're out there walking your dog, going about your day, not expecting it. But seeing another body a few weeks after in the same place, same circumstances, same young kind of lad, this woman must be traumatized for the rest of her life.
She would have been
so sorry for her.
She would have been doubting her own mental sanity.
Yeah.
When you turn around and you see that, having gone through, as I say, the traumatic experience of finding a body, when you turn around and see another body in that same place, that's got to be the moment you think, my mind's playing tricks on me here. This is I'm hallucinating. Something's going wrong here, because that's not another body over there. Unfortunately, it became very, very clear very quickly that this was another body in that same position. But there's one distinct difference between the two discoveries of the bodies, and that is that this time, this body has a note with it. So this is the note that was actually apparently written by Daniel Whitworth and details that he has taken his own life out of grief and guilt that he's experiencing after accidentally killing Gabriel Kovari 3 weeks or so earlier. The note describes that the whole situation was an accident, that Whitworth had given Kovari GHB, which is predominantly known as a date rape drug, and after detailing that it was an accident and that he couldn't live with the guilt, the note ended with something very, very strange and revealing when it read, BTW, which stands for by the way, please do not blame the guy I was with last night. We only had sex, then I left. He knows nothing of what I have done. I have taken what G I had left with sleeping pills, so if it does kill me, that is what I deserve. Feeling dizzy now as took 10 minutes ago, so hoping you understand my writing. Now again, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but the first thing I want to know after reading that note is who the fuck is the guy from last night?
And not only that, I also want to know if that note is actually even written by Daniel, because quite frankly, let's be honest, mate, the language used, even the handwriting, I think we should analyse, because I don't think any of this adds up at this point. Like, let's be honest, if you've known anyone that has had any thoughts of ending their own life or anywhere near that, you know that they're not operating in this way. They're not using the language that this is used, like BTW, like casual things that just don't make any sense. And then also going, oh, I feel dizzy now, I'm going to stop writing this note. Like, this is a red flag. I mean, this is the biggest of red flags imaginable.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes as well, it's not what you do right, it's what you don't write. And there's not a significant mention of a family member in there, of a partner in there. There's nothing really to indicate that this person knows anything about the life of the victim and the man who the note was left on. And actually, what they ended up doing is they went to Daniel's family, and they also went to a handwriting expert, right? And both were unable to say confidently that that is Daniel's handwriting. However, the police determined that it was. So on what basis they've determined that, I mean, only you could enlighten me.
Also,
I don't know.
by the way, like any of my close family, if they wrote anything on a piece of paper, I'd be able to identify that straight away. So if the parents and the family are there and they're saying, well, we can't identify it, it's pretty obvious. And the fact, again, this is another police failing. It's just like, it's so obvious a staged note. It's so clear to say. Maybe we're just doing that from hindsight, but I have to say, mate, like I've looked at that note, just the language, like everything just doesn't add up.
Well, the other thing that doesn't add up is, despite him claiming that he's taken his own life out of guilt after accidentally giving Gabriel too much G and he's accidentally overdosed, there's no link back to him and Gabriel, is there?
No. And also, do you know what's really weird about this is he doesn't even call him his correct surname. Did you see this? In the note, he called him Gabriel Klein and not Gabriel Kovari as well. So there's just stuff in this that just doesn't add up, to be honest with you. But I tell you what, why didn't we go back now to Stephen Port? Because right at this moment, the police are looking at what they think is an apparent suicide note, but we know it's actually linked back to
Starts off by the police taking more of a thorough look into Gabriel himself, and upon doing so, they very quickly discover that Gabriel was spending time with Stephen Port, the same man who they know is guilty of perverting the course of justice in the first body that was found, the same man that they know has allegations against him. However, it's still not at this point that the alarm bells are ringing off.
Let me just tell you a little bit more about who Gabriel was and give you a bit more of a background on him. Gabriel Kovari was a 22-year-old Slovakian man who moved to the UK as a student. He was described as a very, very smart and sweet-natured lad who didn't see the bad side in others. Gabriel actually met Stephen Port via a dating site where he had a profile saying that he was looking for a room to rent. He agreed to meet Stephen Port, who had what he said was a spare room. And now, as you've heard earlier in this podcast, we've said very clearly clearly Stephen actually only had a 1-bedroom flat. So again, that's the start and where we, carry on going on the lies. Gabriel moved into Port's flat on Cook Street on August the 23rd, 2014. He shared photos from inside that flat to a friend, and he identified the location via a pin drop as well. What's clear is that Stephen really liked Gabriel, and he actually said to his friend Ryan Edwards, who was also his neighbour, that he should come round and meet this new Slovakian twink flatmate, and said that he was taking very good care of him. Joey, that's also where alarm bells should really start ringing.
Yeah, can I also just ask you, what is a twink?
I think a twink is a young-looking gay man that has a sort of a boyish look to him, as opposed to, like a really masculine man kind of look.
And that is in line with the profile of every man to date that has been found?
Yes, and you got to remember there are a lot of men coming in and out of that flat, and neighbours also described how worried they were about the look of these young lads. So much so that they actually thought that Stephen might have been a nonce, to be fair, because of how young these kids looked. Now, I have to say, I've done a bit of research into this. I don't know how much of that is true per se, but he was obviously going for younger looking lads.
So this friend that Stephen Port introduced Gabriel to, what is his next chain of thought? Because surely all of a sudden Gabriel disappears. I'm not sure whether or not he knew about the murder of Gabriel, but we do know that he had contacted Stephen Port about Gabriel, didn't we?
Yeah, and the first thing, and I think this is really a common thing that Stephen does, is that he constantly tries to cover his tracks, right? So what had come out about Gabriel is that he had a former partner that lived in Spain, and so Stephen immediately goes to that as a sort of a fallback measure here, and he says, yeah, it might have gone back to Spain, he might have gone back to Slovakia. At one point, mate, he even says to the neighbour, oh, he could have just died. And again, it's like...
Weird thing to say.
What's
very, very strange thing to say in a case like this. And as you say, very much something that would make me instinctively think, hold on, are you getting your excuses in here? Are you getting your ducks in order here? There's nothing logical to say that a young man might have died. A young man who doesn't have known pre-existing health conditions and things like that. It's bizarre, isn't it?
It is super weird. And do you know, have you seen the BBC Three documentary on this case? There's a young lad that's involved in this. Yeah, there's a lad involved in this called John Pape. And basically, Gabriel was living with John Pape before he went and lived with Stephen. And basically, he was also super concerned about this. And also, much like Anthony's mother as well, and there's loads of other people involved in this case as well, they wouldn't really let up and sort of take the police's word for it. Because basically what tend to happen here is that the police would say, oh yeah, these deaths aren't suspicious, we're not really looking into it. The fact that there was GBH in their system doesn't really concern us. And so they'd constantly try and sort of, put it under the rug and kind of move on with it. But what we have to give credit to all of these people, so Anthony's mum, John Pape, all of these people wouldn't let it go and they would look into this. And so John Pape was one of these people that he actually started going on Facebook, trying to connect with people that Gabriel was friends with to try and ascertain what actually happened here. So they actually found Gabriel's body on the 28th of August 2014, and he was found slumped up against a wall in St Margaret's churchyard. Now, this is where we mentioned earlier on, this was the first occasion that a dog walker actually found his body. Now, on his body, they actually found a bottle of GHB, and interestingly, his phone was also not with him, which was unusual for him as well. Now, initially, the police did not treat this as suspicious because they thought, again, that he just overdosed. And at this point, this is where it all went quiet.
Or at least for a little while, because by March 2015, Stephen Port was finally locked up and put where he belongs, behind bars. The bad news is that he was not locked up for any of these crimes. He was actually locked up for perverting the course of justice. And that meant that by June 2015, Stephen Port was back out. He was back on the streets, and he was back very much pursuing his old ways. He was speaking to men on the internet, trying to lure them in.
Daniel Whitworth, the man that was actually found with that note, was a 23-year-old chef from Gravesend in Kent. He was actually, unfortunately, in a long-term relationship with another young man, Ricky Walmsley, at the time, but he was still on gay dating apps during this entire period. Now, he actually met Stephen Port for a gay dating website called Fit Lads after many sort of of conversations and exchanges, he actually arranged to meet in Barking on the 18th of September 2014. So he was actually found with a fatal dose of GHB in his system. And again, unfortunately, his body was found in almost exactly the same place as Gabriel's. And again, that's the second time that the dog walker actually found a body.
And by September 2015, a fourth body is found. So this time it is 25-year-old Jack Taylor. Jack Taylor lives with his family in Dagenham and works as a forklift driver. This time, not in the same spot, but only technically. It was literally found in the same spot, just on the other side of the wall of the graveyard, meaning that it wasn't technically found in the graveyard. The body was found on the roadside, giving it a different location. But as I say, it's literally separated by a wall, which means 4 men go missing in the proximity of about 500 meters, all found in very, very similar circumstances, and all found having suffered very, very similar ways of death. It's only after the family of this man pushed police to investigate further and present them with the evidence that there were 3 other similar deaths in the area, and after body number 4 is found, over a year since the first being discovered, that police finally consider that these deaths could be linked. Following this, police finally reveal some CCTV footage that they have obtained of Jack from the night before his body was found, and the key detail here is he was accompanied in this CCTV by another man. And after looking into it, it is discovered that Jack had earlier on that evening used the Grindr app to arrange to meet up with somebody. That somebody was, of course, Stephen Port.
Yes. Why are you searching for boy drugged? And that search, I can tell you, during the evening of the 12th, shortly before midnight, and then some of them occurred in the early hours of the morning, later on in the morning after 4 o'clock, and onwards later on that day on the 13th, on Sunday the 13th, the time when Jack Taylor is either dead or dying. You're searching for boy drugged, rape, etc. Why is that?
No, just generally looking for general porn.
That's not general porn, Stephen, is it? You're specifically searching for videos of porn to do with people who are either asleep or have been drugged and are being raped. You've typed in the word rape, haven't you?
It's not just searching for random videos. What's the specific in particular?
Nothing specific. Is that right?
Yeah.
It sounds quite specific. You were searching for these videos before Jack came over to the Barking area, and then when he was in the Barking area, you were searching for these videos as well. Is that because you were with him?
No.
And that you just drugged him as well?
No, definitely not.
Were you watching these videos whilst having sex with him, raping him whilst he'd been drugged?
No, definitely not.
Definitely not.
Now, I'm not bothered about being rude about this man, but obviously I don't want to offend anyone. So I'm not saying this in a way to cause any offence. But watching that interview there, he is not the full ticket, very, very clearly. He looks like a man and comes across as a man with the mental age of a child, really. I mean, we recently sat down and covered the Jamie Bolger case and had to sit through and listen audio tapes of children being interviewed. It wasn't a million miles off what we got out of Stephen Port there, was it?
No, it's quite clear that this guy doesn't have any social skills at all, or any ability to have a conversation, which is why he led his life to be perpetually online. By all accounts, he spent all of his time on his computer. He couldn't be out in the real world and socialize with anyone, and he lived his life digitally. And I think that comes across very clearly in the interviews. It's incredibly cringe. Yeah. I mean, if you listen, there's sort of 11 minutes, I think, or maybe even 17 minutes of footage from that interview that's been released to the public. It's just awful.
No, he hasn't even got the strength or the sort of willpower at that time to even fight back against the claims, give sort of any alibi, anything like that. He's admitted defeat. His body language is telling the officers there, I am guilty of this. I cannot even look at you in the eye and make eye contact with you.
So what is clear then is that this guy's banged to rights. We now have to go into the details of the court case. So Stephen Port was tried at the Criminal Central Court in the Old Bailey. The prosecution's case against him was described as pretty technically challenging, complicated by a significant amount of evidence used from various social media sites that Port used, including all of the dating sites that we've mentioned throughout this episode. The prosecution stated that Port's offending behavior was driven by his appetite for sex with younger men while they were unconscious and using drugs. So that is a very, very serious accusation, and one that comes with a pretty significant sentence. And they also argued that Port derives sexual gratification from viewing these images, and it really, really just gets worse and worse from there. Stephen Port actually faced a total of 29 charges, not just the 4 counts of murder against Anthony Walgate, Gabriel Kovari, Daniel Whitworth and Jack Taylor, but also 7 charges of rape, 4 other assaults as well as 10 charges administering GHB to stupefy for sexual purposes. He also faced 4 other alternative charges for manslaughter. Stephen Port had the audacity to plead not guilty for these charges. His defense claimed that he'd met these men, and in some cases they had been in his flat and taken overdoses of GHB in front of him. Now, what's hilarious about this court case, and so harrowing and sad for the actual families that had to sit through this bollocks, is that this guy kept on making stories. He kept changing that. He said, you know, I knew these guys. Oh, I didn't actually come into contact with them. I didn't know who they were. Oh, well, now I know who they were. They weren't in my flat. Now they were. He just had no ability to keep a story straight. And this is what we were saying about how his, you know, his mental acuity wasn't quite there, which meant that in November 2016, Stephen Port was convicted of 22 offences against a total of 11 men. These convictions included the murders of the 4 gentlemen that we have described. And on November the 25th, 2016, the trial judge, Mr. Justice Openshaw, sentenced Stephen Port to life imprisonment, and he was given a whole life order, which basically means he cannot be released in custody. He will stay in prison for the rest of his natural life in HMP Belmarsh in Thamesmead, South London, and he continues to maintain his innocence to this day. He actually tried to force an appeal against the murder convictions in August 2018, but luckily and thankfully that was rejected in November 2018. So that sort of brings us to the end of the court case. I think Joey and I will very much agree that this guy needs to be in prison for the rest of his life. He's a dangerous man, a sick man, and the thought of him getting out is very concerning indeed.
It is. I think, like always in these cases though, we can't ignore the elephant in the room. Now, the responsibility for these horrific murders, and, you know, not just the horrific murders, the treatment of these young men completely lies on Stephen Port. We're not trying to delegate that responsibility, but this is a case that is littered with shortcomings from the police, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, the fact they didn't even look at the laptops, you know, they didn't look at all of the circumstances of the bodies. They didn't put together that these 4 gentlemen in a local area would all be connected. They all had similar circumstances. There wasn't any sort of like thought process by the police to piece pieces together. Homicide detectives weren't talking to local police. There's a litany of problems that would go throughout this, and there was actually an independent investigation of the Met Police as a result of this. And again, the Met Police actually acknowledged that there was incompetence by some of their police officers. I think 7 of the police officers were actually admitted to have some form of incompetence. Do you want to know some crazy news about that?
Yep.
5 of those police officers were subsequently promoted.
Promoted. It's mental.
It's a joke, isn't
mental.
it?
And if you're those families, I mean, look, it's awful for every single man that lost his life at the hands of this fucking monster. But the first body that was found, maybe there's an element there where if you're the family, you feel that, you know, it's not something that is massively avoidable, you know, because it was the first there. But once you found that body, once you've realized that the man who reported it has not only perverted the course of justice, also has reports and somewhat of a record which details that he has been accused of drugging men, raping men in the past, I truly do believe that had the police been more competent, free lives would have been saved.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know what we have to credit now is all of the friends and family. There was Auntie's mum that I want to shout out in particular, Sarah Sack. She actually fought for years and actually had to compile her own evidence, push the police to actually do some action. And it wasn't just her. There was obviously John Paper, who we mentioned earlier, and there were countless other friends and family members of all 4 of the victims here that had to go out and actually sort of like desperately try to get the police involved and actually to look into this case. And I have to commend every single one of them, because not only were they dealing with immense trauma of losing their sons or brothers or whatever it was in any relation to them, but they also had to deal with the incompetence of the police and the fact they had to find their own case and build their own evidence. I think it's super, super sad. So what we will say is we send all of our love and our thoughts to those families through what was a horrendous moment in their life, and I hope they find some form of peace in their life, knowing that Stephen Port will be in prison for the rest of his life. And also obviously for the victims as well, we send our regards to all of those, you know, poor men that suffered at his hands as well.
100% agree with that. 100%. Let us know, people, what you want to see us covering next. We absolutely love the amount of recommendations that we have been getting from you guys. We're actually making our way through them. This was another case that was recommended to us that people wanted to see us cover. We have covered multiple cases now that have been recommended by you guys. And once again, just to remind you, if the weekly videos going out at the normal time that they do to the general public is not filling your fix, you can become a member of the channel. It is around £5 a month, and that means you'll get exclusive access to members only live streams. There's obviously less people in them than the general live streams, and that means that we get back to all of your questions. We have a chat with you. We discuss upcoming cases every single week. By the way, we reveal to the members what the next case that they will have to look forward to is, and we discuss the fallout from the cases that we have covered the previous week. So let us know, and definitely join up to the membership if that tickles your fancy. If not, please do us a massive favor. Sorry, you've made it to the end of another video, so smash the like button on this one, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you all in the next one.